Experiences on various paths. Knowledge of various paths leads you to form your own conviction. The more you know, the more you decide to learn. When you have sharpened the faculty of discrimination, you firmly tread your path without any doubts. A renowned lady sage. We two young aspirants, Nantin Baba and I, lived in the Lariakanta forests of Nainital when I was 16 years of age. At that time, Anandamayi Ma, a well-known spiritual leader of India, was going on a pilgrimage with her husband. Although they traveled together, they did not have the usual husband-wife relationship, but had mutually developed an understanding of the value of abstinence and had decided to live as celibates. They were both in their 40s and were totally dedicated to the Lord. On this pilgrimage, they were accompanied by a large group of followers and were traveling from Manasarova to Kailash, which is near Mount Everest, the highest of the Himalayan mountains. A pilgrimage to this site is considered to be the greatest of all, and on the way the people aspire to have a glance of the sages and to meet the adepts. Anandamayi Ma heard about us two young renunciates and came to visit us on her way to Kailash. When she returned from Kailash 2 months later, she again passed through Nainital, and at that time we met her again and attended her group meetings in the evenings. She was a follower of this path of love and devotion, and regularly offered discourses on the path to her large following. There are many paths to enlightenment, generally referred to in yoga, but actually there are 6 main paths, and Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion, is one of them. This path of love is a path of self-surrender and compassion. In this path, humility, gentleness, purity, simplicity, and sincerity are important virtues. It is the path of the heart. This means that the followers direct the power of emotion toward God. Many on this path start flowing tears when they hear talk of God or when they assemble for chanting. Philosophically, the aspirant on this path does not want to merge his individuality into God, but prefers to have a separate identity and to be always in the service of the Lord. The philosophy of liberation according to this path is nearness to God. Liberation means attaining status in the celestial plane where one can constantly remain near to God. Many follow this path, but it is not an easy path to follow, as most people think. Bhakti Yoga is not the path of blind followers. Jnana Yoga is a path of knowledge and is called the yoga of the intellect. This study involves not merely the cognitive intellect, but rather that intellect which has been sharpened by listening attentively to the sayings of the great sages as they are taught by a competent teacher, and then contemplating on these sayings to finally attain a state of freedom. This path is like the razor's edge, and if one does not tread it with discipline, he might become egotistical. Constant company of the sages and contemplation with the help of non-attachment are important requisites in this path. Karma Yoga is a path followed by those who believe in doing duties selflessly. These aspirants understand that all the fruits of one's actions should be surrendered to God, who dwells in everyone's heart. Selfless action performed skillfully liberates one from the bondage created by the fruits therein. Knowledge of karma yoga is essential to attain liberation. By performing right actions which do not create bondage, and by attaining higher knowledge, one liberates oneself from the rounds of birth and death. Kundalini Yoga is one of the aspects of yoga which is practiced by those who understand a great deal about the body, the nervous system, and the various channels of energy in the human body. The special disciplines that help the aspirant to control his bodily functions and internal states are essential. The primal force which remains in the sleeping state at the base of the spinal column is conspicuously awakened and led through the Sushumna to the highest of the chakras, where the Shakti principle unites with the Shiva principle. Sushumna is the most subtle channel on which the primal force travels. Without its application, that Kundalini force cannot rise. Chakras are the wheels of life used for the subtle body. Shakti is the Divine Mother who manifests the universe. She is the universal power which can function only through that mother force. Raja Yoga is a path of systemic discipline which leads the student upward along the 8-runged ladder to a state called Samadhi, or union with the absolute reality. This is the most comprehensive path and is a highly systemic and evolved science in which karma, bhakti, kundalini, and jnana are combined. The philosophy of Raja Yoga is based on Sankhya philosophy. Sri Vidya, in which the microcosm and macrocosm are thoroughly understood, is the highest of all the paths, and is practiced only by very few accomplished ones. It is a practical path, but it requires strong philosophical understanding before it is trodden. Practice based on the mere information of books could be time-consuming as well as dangerous. A competent teacher is necessary in this spiritual practice, and the principles of Tantra and other philosophies need to be thoroughly understood before a student takes such a venture. This extremely rare path is followed only by the highly accomplished sages. Nantin Baba and I attended a gathering of Anandamayi Ma's students, in which everyone was chanting in Bengali and Hindi. We enjoyed listening to the chants, but felt more like observers than part of the group. We were both more inclined toward meditation, and were on the paths of Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga, although we also appreciated the other paths. If a person follows one particular path, it does not mean that he hates the other paths. Nonetheless, one of Anandamayi Ma's students came up to us and tried to convince us that the path of devotion was the highest one, and that we should switch to it. He asked, "Why are you not participating in the chanting?" I told him, "The horse that pulls the buggy does not enjoy pulling it, but the person who is seated in the buggy enjoys the ride, and benefits by witnessing and sitting quietly. The person who is performing the action does not enjoy it as much as the wise man who is witnessing it. Some people chant, and others enjoy chanting silently. We are enjoying more than anyone else. How do you know that we do not follow the path of devotion?" In his ignorance, this student was very adamant that his path was the only one. Our discussion soon led to an argument, and Anandamayi Ma intervened by saying to her follower, "Don't argue with these two young renunciates. One should try to understand one's own inner worth, and then follow the path best suited to him. The path of devotion does not mean dumb devotion. Devotion means total dedication, surrender, and love for the Lord. It is the path of the heart, but it does not contradict that intellect or reason which solves many problems of life. Devotion is also part of the other paths. It is not possible for the jnana yogi to attain enlightenment if he does not also have devotion. Everyone wants to follow bhakti, the path of devotion, thinking that it is very easy and simple. But that's not true. The path of devotion means accepting the existence of the Lord instead of worshipping one's own existence. Those who weep, shiver, become emotional, or act in a funny way cannot be called the followers of bhakti yoga. Tranquility of mind should be cultivated. Then all the paths can be understood, and not before that. Purification of the mind is necessary, and is achieved by disciplining one's mind, action, and speech. Argumentation is a state of learning, and not a state of being. I remember her remarkable discourse even today. I asked her, "Is it true that your path is superior to other paths, and that only what you are doing is authentic? Do you think that others are wasting their time?" She replied, "My path of devotion suits me, but do not change your paths." Those who do not have guidance become confused and often change their paths. A confused mind is not fit to follow any path. Seekers of truth should learn to search for competence and guidance by seeing certain signs and symptoms in the teacher, such as selflessness, truthfulness, sincerity, and control of mind, action, and speech. Students also commit mistakes when they become idealistic, without observing their capacity or following any discipline. They see only what they want to see. This prevents them from learning, and then they get attached to the path which they think they are following. They become very fanatical and egotistical, and even begin fighting with people. This can happen to any seeker if his inferiority complex goes on developing and creating boundaries, closing all the doors of knowledge, and making him self-centered, uncommunicative, and egotistical. Ma confirmed our ideas and strengthened those principles which we were following. She said, "Learning the scriptures is very good and helpful, but without satsanga, such learning can also make anyone egotistical. A learned man having satsanga is very humble, communicative, and gentle in his behavior. Beginners often argue and boast about the superiority of their way, but one who has trodden the path knows that all paths lead to the same destination. There is no superior or inferior path. It is immaterial which path one follows, but one should carefully watch one's own modifications of mind and learn not to identify with them." As she stared at the eyes of her husband, which were like cups of wine full of devotion, we said goodbye to Anandamayi Ma, and I went to the quiet place where I often used to hide myself. With my heart on my palms and tears in my eyes. In India, Hindus, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, and Sufis have lived harmoniously for many centuries. India is a melting pot. Whoever visits India gets into this pot. This has been the history of Indian civilization. In the subcontinent of India, people were peaceful, but the aliens who ruled India created hatred among the various religious groups because of their policy of divide and rule. Sufis from all over the world go to India to pay homage to Indian Sufis. But today India is the home of Sufism. Sufism is a religion of love and is not followed by Mohammedans exclusively. Among the several Sufi sages I have met, one of the greatest was a woman who lived in the city of Agra, 120 miles away from Delhi. The city is famous because of the Taj Mahal, a symbol of love, and one of the wonders of the world. Once I traveled from the Himalayas to visit this old woman sage who lived completely naked in a small dargah, which is a dwelling and worshipping place of a holy Muslim fakir. She was 93 years of age and never slept at night. I used to call her Bibiji. This word is used for mother. She would call me my son, Beti. During my stay at Agra, I regularly visited this Sufi woman sage between 12 and 1 in the morning. My visiting Bibiji at nights was misunderstood, so much that people started thinking I had lost my equilibrium. Several high army officials and learned people also used to visit her. Colonel J. S. Khaira was her great devotee. Although she was adored by Hindus and others equally, many people in the city did not understand this great Sufi mystic and her mysterious way of living. Her compassion toward her visitors was immense, but her attitude towards the mundane world was self-explanatory. The people of the world have learned how to fill up earthen bowls with grains and coins, but no one knows how to fill the bowl of the heart. One night Bibiji told me that it would be easy for me to meet God. I asked, "What is the way?" She said, "To be one with the divine, one has simply to detach oneself from this mundane world and be linked with the beloved. It is so simple. Offer your ruh, meaning soul, to the Lord, and then there is nothing to be done or realized any more." I said, "Bibiji, but how?" She started using a dialogue. I am narrating it exactly as she related it to me. She said, "As I went to see my beloved, he asked, 'Who is that standing at the entrance of my shrine?' I said, 'Thy lover, Lord.' The Lord said, 'What proof can you give?' I said, 'Here is my heart on my palms, and tears in my eyes.' And the Lord said, 'I accept thy offering, for I also love thee. Thou art mine. Go and live in the dargah.' Since then, my son, I live here. I wait for him day and night, and I will wait for him till eternity." I remembered the words of a great man who said, "This poisonous tree of life has but two fruits: contemplation on immortality, and conversing with the sages." Many times I would watch a very powerful light emanating from Bibiji's eyes. She impressed me deeply because of her superb, divine ecstasy, her complete self-surrender, and her unfathomable love for God. She said, The pearl of wisdom is already hidden within the shell in the ocean of the heart. Dive deep, and one day you will find it. One day she smilingly cast off her body. A light like that of a star was witnessed by the 12 of us who were sitting around her. The light came out of her heart and sped toward the sky like lightning. She remains in my heart always. I remember my BBG with great love and reverence. Karma is the maker. I used to hear a lot about a sage called Uriya Baba, who was very famous for his learning and spiritual wisdom. He lived in Vrindavan. My master sent me to live with this sage. A devotee of this Baba who knew me well took me to Vrindavan. When I arrived there, I found hundreds of people waiting to have a darshan of this great man. The Baba was informed by his devotee about my arrival. He very kindly instructed his devotee to take me to his room. This great man was very short in stature and about 65 years of age. He was considered to be one of the greatest learned scholars of North India. He had a large following all over the country. He was very kind and generous to me. In the evenings, we used to go to the banks of the Yamuna for evening ablutions. One evening I asked him, "Is renouncing the world superior to living in the world? Which is the right path?" During those days I had been studying the philosophy of karma. I knew that karma means cause and effect. I also knew that it is difficult to get freedom from these twin laws of karma. The Baba, in the course of conversation, told me, "It is not necessary for all human beings to renounce the world, for the path of renunciation is very difficult to tread. Actually, it is not necessary to renounce the objects of the world, because a human being does not actually own or possess anything. Therefore, it is not necessary to renounce anything. But the sense of possessiveness should be renounced. Whether you live in the world or outside, it does not make much difference. Attachment to the objects of the world is cause of misery. One who practices non-attachment faithfully and sincerely obtains freedom from the bondage of karma. In the path of action, duties are not renounced, but are performed skillfully and selflessly. The renunciate renounces the objects and goes far away from them, but he also performs his essential duties. Those who live in the world as householders also perform their essential duties. Those who become selfish by receiving and using the fruits of their action create many encumbrances for themselves. It becomes difficult for them to get freedom from this self-created bondage. If all attachments and sense of ownership are not renounced, the path of renunciation becomes miserable. If the householders do not practice non-attachment, and continue to strengthen selfishness and possessiveness, it also creates misery for them. To attain the purpose of life, it is necessary to do one's duties, whether one lives in the world or outside it. The path of renunciation and the path of action, though two diverse ways, are equally helpful for attaining self-emancipation. One is the path of sacrifice, the other the path of conquest. Again the Baba spoke. The law of karma is applicable to all equally. Our past samskaras are deeply rooted in the unconscious. These latent samskaras or impressions create various bubbles of thoughts, and express themselves through our speech and actions. It is possible for the aspirant to get freedom from these samskaras. These memories have a stronghold in the bed of our samskaras. Those who can burn these samskaras in the fire of non-attachment or knowledge are free from the bondage created by them. It is like a burnt rope which loses its binding power, though it still looks like a rope. When the latent impressions, though still in the unconscious, are burned by the fire of knowledge and lose the power of germination, they never grow. They are like roasted coffee beans. You can use them to brew a cup of coffee, but they have no power to grow. There are two varieties of diverse qualities of samskaras. One quality of samskara is helpful on the path of spirituality, and the other is an obstacle. Non-attachment is like a fire that burns the binding power of past samskaras. The benefits which are derived by the renunciate by renouncing the world are derived by the householder by the practice of non-attachment. The renunciate attains enlightenment outside the world, and the householder in the world. Non-attachment does not mean indifference or non-loving. Non-attachment and love are one and the same. Non-attachment gives freedom, but attachment brings bondage. Through non-attachment, the householder remains aware of his purpose of life and does his duty selflessly. His actions become means for him. In renunciation, the renunciate remains aware of the purpose of his life constantly and attains enlightenment. Non-attachment and renunciation expand the consciousness. When an individual learns to expand his consciousness or unites with the universal consciousness, then he no longer remains within the bounds of his karma. One remains totally free. Such a great man has power to show the path of freedom to others. Whether he is in the world or outside, he can also heal the sickness arising from karmic debts. He can remain untouched and above without being involved or reaping the fruits arising from others' karmic debts. A true master has control over himself and moves freely in the world. When a potter has completed making his pots, the wheel of the potter still rotates for some time, but is unable to manufacture pots. For a liberated soul, the wheel of life remains in motion, but his karma does not create any bondage for him. His actions are actionless actions. When the student is competent to tread the path of enlightenment, it becomes easy for a great man to guide him, and one day he also attains ultimate freedom. I asked the Baba to tell me about the great men and their abilities of healing others. He said, "There are 3 levels of healing: physical, mental, and spiritual. Man is a citizen of these 3 levels. One who has spiritual powers can heal others on all levels. But if he tries to make healing his profession, his mind and will force will again start running toward worldly grooves. A dissipated and worldly mind is not fit enough to heal anyone. The moment one becomes selfish, the mind changes its course and starts flowing downward to the lower grooves. Misuse of spiritual power weakens and distracts the very basis of that power, which is called Ichcha Shakti. The great men always say that all the powers belong to the Lord. They are only instruments. Every human being has potentials for healing. The healing energy is flowing without any interruption in every human heart. By the right use of the dynamic will, these channels of healing can be directed to the suffering part of the body and mind. The healing energy can nourish and strengthen the sufferer. The key to healing is selflessness, love, dynamic will, and undivided devotion to the Lord within. After 15 days' stay with the Baba, I came back with the conclusion that the art of living and being, whether in the world or outside it, lies in the awareness toward the purpose of life and non-attachment. In the ashram of Mahatma Gandhi, in the late 1930s and early 40s, I had the opportunity to stay with Mahatma Gandhi in Vardha Ashram, where I met many gentle and loving souls. While I was there, I observed Mahatma Gandhi serving a leper. The leper was a learned Sanskrit scholar who was frustrated and angry, but Mahatma Gandhi personally looked after him with great care and love. That was an example to all of us. The way in which he served the sick left a lasting impression on me. My master told me to observe Mahatma Gandhi, particularly when he walked. And when I did so, I found that his walk was quite different from the walk of other sages. He walked as though he was separate from his body. He seemed to be pulling his body as the horse pulls the cart. He was a man who constantly prayed for others, and who had no hatred for any religion, caste, creed, sex, or color. He had 3 teachers: Christ, Krishna, and Buddha. A pioneer in the realm of ahimsa consciousness, meaning non-violence, Gandhi always experimented in expanding man's capacity to love. Such a man finds joy in all the storms and trials of life. Gandhi never protected himself, but rather always protected his one principle of ahimsa, or love. The flame of love burned in him day and night like a fire, which nothing could quench. Complete self-reliance and fearlessness were the foundation stones of Gandhi's philosophy. Violence touched the very depths of his being, but valiant in a spirit of ahimsa, he walked on alone. There was not a word of protest, and there was not a flicker of hostility in his life. While staying with Gandhi, I noted these principles in my diary. 1. Non-violence and cowardice cannot go together. Because non-violence is a perfect expression of love that casts out fear. To be brave, because one is armed, implies an element of fear. The power of ahimsa is an extremely vital and active force which does not come from physical strength. 2. A true follower of ahimsa does not believe in disappointment. He dwells above in perennial happiness and peace. That peace and joy do not come to him who is proud of his intellect or learning. They come to him who is full of faith and has undivided and single-pointed mind. 3. The intellect can produce many wonders, but non-violence is a matter of the heart. It does not come through intellectual exercises. 4. Hatred is not overcome by hatred, but rather by love. This is an unalterable law. 5. Devotion is not mere worship with the lips. It is self-surrender with mind, action, and speech. 6. Gandhi did not believe in the barriers created by religions, cultures, superstitions, and mistrust. He taught and lived the brotherhood of all religions. 7. Gandhi believed in the art of living without concern for the fruits of one's actions. He practiced not worrying about success or failure, but paid attention to the work at hand without feeling the slightest anxiety or fatigue. 8. In order to enjoy life, one should not be selfishly attached to anything. Non-attachment means to have a pure motive and a correct means without any worry or desired result. He who gives up actions falls, but he who gives up the reward rises and is liberated. 9. Yoga is the complete reintegration of all the states of mind, the intellect, senses, emotions, instincts, and every level of personality. It is a process of becoming whole. And 10. One's mantra becomes one's staff of life and carries one through every ordeal. Each repetition has a new meaning and carries one nearer and nearer to God. It is capable of transforming that which is negative in the personality into that which is positive, and it can gradually integrate divided and opposing thoughts at deeper and deeper levels of consciousness. After meeting many wonderful and striking personalities like Mahadev Desai, Miraben, and Prabhati Bahen, I became friendly with Ram Das, son of Mahatma Gandhi, and took him to Kausani, one of the fascinating and beautiful places of the Himalayas. Not sacrifice, but conquest. Tagore. When I was a teenager, I often traveled with my brother disciple Dandi Swami Shivananda of Gangotri, who was about 20 years older than I. Once we went on a journey to Mussoorie, a holiday resort at the foot of the Himalayas. On the way we stopped at a small town called Rajpur. During those days, Tagore, a famous poet of the East, was staying in a cottage there. My brother disciple was from Bengal, and knew Tagore and his family well, so we went to visit him. We were invited to live in the same cottage with him for 2 months. Tagore became fond of me, and asked my brother disciple to send me to Shantiniketan, the educational institution he had founded. I strongly felt a desire to visit Shantiniketan and went there in 1940. Ratindranath Tagore, the son of Rabindranath Tagore, received me and arranged for me to stay in one of the cottages next to Sri Malkji, who was a devout and committed admirer of Tagore and his institute. Shantiniketan was then one of the most beautiful and fascinating ashrams of the world. Several hundred students lived and studied there. Tagore was known as Guru Deva by the students of Shantiniketan and as Thakur by the general public. He was a very gifted poet from Bengal and one of the greatest poets of all times. In the realms of religion, philosophy, literature, music, painting, and education, his many-sided, handsome, and towering personality was well known to the world. During the period I lived with Tagore, I was able to observe his devotion to his work. He was always engaged in his daily practice, or was busy writing or painting. He spent very few hours in sleep, and would not recline in the daytime. The infirmities of age did not change his habits. I looked upon him as an earnest sadhaka, meaning spiritual seeker. It is true that one subject of all sadhakas of the world is to be somewhat godlike. It was not necessary for a godlike man like Tagore to imitate other godmen of India in order to express himself. His life was not like that of an ascetic's, which is as barren as a desert. Asceticism is the most ancient path of enlightenment, and genuine asceticism is indeed worthy of reverence. Equally worthy is the treading of the more difficult path of remaining in the world while doing one's duties. Tagore believed in living in the world without being of it. A line from one of his poems: "Liberation by detachment from the world is not mine," is highly expressive of his philosophy. The key point of his life was not sacrifice, but conquest. Humanity has seen three kinds of great men. First, those who were gifted and great by birth. Second, those who have attained greatness by sincere and selfless effort. And third, those unfortunate ones on whom greatness is thrust by the press and publicity. Tagore was in the first category. A gifted and highly talented poet and genius, he lived and practiced according to the sayings of the Upanishads. All whatsoever that moves in the universe is indwelt by the Lord. Enjoy thou what hath been allotted by him. Covet not the wealth of anyone. I admired Tagore. He was the most universal, encompassing, and complete human being I have known. He was a living embodiment of the whole of humanity, who knew both man the knower and man the maker. He believed in allowing a person to grow by satisfying both the demands of society and the need for solitude. Sometimes I used to call him the Plato of the East. His views about the East and West were highly admired by the people of both these cultures. Tagore did not want Westerners to become Easterners in their minds and outward behavior. He wanted the West to join hands with the East in the noble conquest for the promotion of the highest ideas which are common to the whole world. According to him, the evolution of man is the evolution of the creative personality. Man alone has the courage of standing against the biological laws. Behind all great nations and noble works done in the world, there have been noble ideas. An idea is something which is the very basis of creativity. It is true that life is full of misfortunes, but fortunate is he who knows how to utilize the ideas which can make him creative. Time is the greatest of all filters, and ideas are the best of all wealth. Fortune is that rare opportunity which helps one to express his ideas and abilities at the proper time. Tagore's philosophies surmounted all the obstacles which at first obscure the truth. According to him, death has for ages been a source of fear and misery, because people have not pondered over the truth. Oh, who suffer and fear the approach of death should hear and learn the music of Tagore, which teaches how to lose yourself in the infinite and the eternal. Just tune the chords of your being and make them move in harmony with the music of the cosmos. Every woman and man should strive to secure the light of truth, and live simply and wisely for the common good. The rhythm of music supported by Tagore's philosophy of life. Music completed his personality, but this is not all. His words and melodies are still going on in the minds of poets and musicians today. Tagore believed that all existences constitute the one organism of the entire cosmos, emitting love as the highest manifestation of its vital energy, and having as its soul the center of the spiritual galaxy. The world so far talks only about the religion of God, but Tagore always talked about the religion of man. It is a religion of feeling through ecstatic experience, which represents opinion in its most intense and living stage, offering a far better solution to the ills of life than philosophy and metaphysics. Love of God is a sympathetic and synthetic response. The finite being is as much a requirement for God as God for the finite being. The soul of the lotus goes on blossoming for ages, in which I am bound, as though without escape. There is no end to the opening of its petals, and the honey in it has such sweetness that thou, like an enchanted being, canst never desert it, and therefore thou art bound, and I am, and salvation is nowhere. After staying in Shantiketan, I decided to leave for the Himalayas to assimilate the ideas I had acquired there, and then formulate certain guidelines for my future. I still remember a few striking lines from Tagore's poems. I read in the problem of life and the world, the twist of tears and joy. I see before myself the busy feet of the wind, suggesting humanity and law. The wind hastens to the shadow whose passion lies. Shall we go abroad and start anew, O wind, to build again a better life and song? Setting history straight. When I was about 20 years of age, I traveled to Simla, one of the holiday resorts in the Punjab Himalayas. I met a Swami there who the people called Punjabi Maharaj. He was a very tall, healthy, handsome, and learned man. I had an umbrella in my hand, and he asked me, "Why do you carry such a burden? Be free." As we were walking together, it started to rain. Since I had the umbrella, I opened it. He said, "What are you doing?" I answered, "I am protecting us from the rain." He said, "Don't do that. This is a link between heaven and earth. Why should we be deprived of that? Throw away your umbrella and other belongings if you want to walk with me." I protested, "Swamiji, I will get wet." He told me, "If you are afraid of getting your clothes wet, either don't wear clothes and walk freely, or get out of the rain." What he said affected me. I left my umbrella right there on the path. Since then, when it rains and I am outside, I really enjoy it. In the winter this Swami would walk about wearing only a thin cotton garb. It was his only possession. He was a man with a very sensitive nature, but he had completely mastered his sensitivity to heat and cold. When the mind contacts the objects of the world through the senses, It experiences sensations of pain and pleasure. If you learn not to contact the objects of the world, you will be free from external influences and find greater pleasure within. This Swami was very learned and spoke only English. For hours he would talk about English literature, and we would discuss Swami Rama Tirtha's life and works. He received his Master of Science degree from Oxford University and his Doctorate of Science from Lahore University. Though he lectured on the universality of Vedanta philosophy, he detested the alien rule in India. During this time before India's independence, there was a small sect of modern Swamis who did not practice meditation. They were young and learned, and understanding the condition of the country, they participated in the freedom movement. I called them politician Swamis. They would say, "External freedom first, internal freedom later on." This Swami was a politician Swami. Actually, he had become a Swami out of frustration after seeing the condition of the country. He was kind and gentle, but he could be very rebellious. He did not follow the normal disciplines of a renunciate, but rather spent his whole time totally preoccupied with the thought of overthrowing British rule in India. This was his worship and aim of life. Sometimes he was arrested twice a day for insulting Britishers. He would annoy British officers by abruptly telling them to leave the country. He would call them names and say, "You are speaking English, and you don't know grammar. You don't know your own language. What a tragedy that the imperial government sends such uneducated people, who do not come from good families, to India." Once, when we were walking in the hills outside Simla, a British officer came galloping on his horse from the opposite direction. He stopped the horse suddenly when he saw us and yelled, "You monkeys, get out of the way!" He jerked the reins and fell off the horse onto the road. The Swami told him, "We have every right to walk on this road. This is my country. Mind your own business. Get up, get on your horse, and go away. I am not your slave." The next day the Swami was arrested, but within 2 hours he was released. The governor of that state knew him from London, and also knew that this Swami would create more problems if he were in jail. During this time I had some prejudice against the British rulers of India, and thought of helping the freedom movement. The Swami said, "Come on, let's use guns, and one by one destroy these British administrators." He sincerely wanted me to join him and fight the British. He said that it was not a sin. If someone comes to your house and tries to destroy your culture, why can't you defend yourself? He was the most bitter Swami I had ever met. I believed in Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy, psychology, and movement, but I never took an active part in politics. I wanted to influence this Swami to leave politics, and he wanted to influence me to enter politics. This went on for 4 months. He tried to persuade me, but my master said that I should not join any political party. My master said, "You are from the cosmos, and a citizen of the world. Why identify with people of India only? Your concern should be for the whole of humanity. First, have inner strength. Sharpen your intellect. Learn to control your emotions, and then take action. Fanatic devotion to a country, even one as spiritually great as India, does not befit a man of God. My master told me not to become involved in violence and even predicted the date of independence for India. Later, this Simla Swami and I separated. We decided to tread our own paths. The same year he was shot by the British police in the Kulu Valley of the Himalayas. During my stay in Simla, I met a British missionary who was writing a book on Indian culture and philosophy. He allowed me to read the manuscript. I was shocked to read the numerous lies he had written about India, her culture, civilization, and philosophy. He even tried to convert me and tempt me to marry a rich British girl. Conversion to what? Lifestyle and cultural habits? I loved Christianity because of my love for Christ and the Bible, but this man created a repulsion in my mind. After that, I avoided the Christian missionaries who roamed around the cities, villages, and mountains. These people were financed and supported by the British government and were politicians in the garb of missionaries. By writing such books, they knowingly tried to damage the ancient Vedic civilization. They distorted the Vedic culture and philosophy, which is the mother of several religions, including Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. The Swami in Simla used to oppose such missionaries and say, "You missionaries are not true followers of Christ and have no knowledge of the Bible." For 200 to 300 years, these British missionaries tried to destroy the civilization of India, but they could not accomplish this for two main reasons. The first, the architects and custodians of Indian culture and civilization are women. And the second, 75% of the people of India live in the villages and remain untouched by the influence of the British rulers and missionaries. In spite of several hundred years of alien rule in India, they could not change Indian civilization. They were successful, though, in changing the language and dress, and in introducing some British customs. The British government launched an extensive campaign by publishing such literature as the book written by the missionary. Indian writers and scholars were suppressed and even arrested and jailed if they refuted these books or wrote against the campaign. Such literature published by the Britishers created confusion and misguided Western scholars and travelers, thereby depriving them of studying the vast wealth of Indian literature, philosophy, and science. Although Paul Deussen, Max Muller, Goethe, and other writers wrote books on yoga and the system of Indian philosophy in the Upanishads, confusion and misunderstanding still remain among the general Western public. Not a single book on yoga was written with honesty and sincerity by Western writers before Annie Besant, the famous theosophist who became president of the Congress Party of India, and Sir John Woodroffe. He was the foremost of the Western writers on Indian philosophy. Though he could not write on as many scriptures as he desired, he introduced the philosophy of Tantra to the Western world. I pity travelers and so-called writers who still persist in writing books on yoga, philosophy, Tantra, and other spiritual subjects without studying, knowing, or practicing them. A distorted history of India was intentionally introduced in the schools. Because of this, Indian students forgot their culture and history. To lose touch with one's traditions is to lose touch with one's self. Education in India was completely changed by the British. All the subjects were taught in the English medium, and every student was forced to pray according to the way of the British missionaries. there was no freedom of thought, so there could be no freedom of speech and action. If someone did not have an education of the kind imparted by the British, he could never get a job. Through this, I learned how power corrupts a nation and destroys its culture and civilization. The surest way to destroy a country and its culture is by first changing its language. The British were successful because they did this. Even after 30 years of independence, English is still India's official language. Since India did not have one native language, there was and still is a lack of communication from the various states of India. Indian Rajas had fought among themselves and could not make a united front. Thus, India suffered for several hundred years. Unifying the language of India is one of the greatest tasks that the people and the government have yet to complete. A good, sound language produces good literature, which enshrines the culture, education, and civilization. In India, this is still lacking, and is why countrymen from various parts of the land cannot communicate even today. The present system of education and upbringing in India should be carefully adapted to the varied requirements of the Indian civilization. The construction of new types of schools, national literature and art should be encouraged everywhere. We have still to think about the fundamental reconstruction of the whole order of Indian society through literature, science, art, and education. The massive method of thinking and living needs to be changed into positive and active dynamism. The most characteristic trait of education should be inseparable, connecting the various cultures and their collective civilization. Remember, thou, the words of the sages who advised you to acquire and to utilize all that which was valuable in the deployment of human thought and culture in thy ancient history. Learn thou quickly to realize the necessity of giving truly international education to the rising generation of India. The Swami from Simla made me aware that before British rule, India was very rich, not only in culture, civilization, and spirituality, but also in jewels and gold. Many miseries were created by the invaders, like the Moguls, after they crossed the river Sindhu from the west of India, and later by the French, the Portuguese, and finally the British. They destroyed the financial, economic, cultural, and historical India, which was once called the Golden Bird. India's precious jewels, gold, and other riches were looted by these invaders and taken to their own countries. Once people had abundance, and there was much less disparity between the rich and the poor. Then the caste system in India was structured according to the distribution of labor, but it was completely changed by the Britishers, who created hatred with their policy of divide and rule. When I tell this, I have no hatred. It is the naked truth. Many travelers even today do not know true Indian history. They repeat the same question again and again. If India is spiritual, why is there so much poverty? I am not a politician, but many people ask me why India is so poor. So I say that spirituality and economy could not compromise in any of the histories of the world. They are two entirely different things. Religion and politics always remained separate in India, and spiritual people never became involved in politics. These two diverse forces in India could not unite, Therefore, power decreased. The poverty in India is not because of spirituality, but because of not practicing spirituality and not knowing the technique of integrating spirituality with external life. Those leading the country now should become aware of this fact. India suffers because the leaders and people of the country today still do not have a unified vision for uplifting the country as a whole. They do not have an answer to the population problem, nor does there seem to be any immediate solution. I think India is surviving only because of her rich spiritual and cultural heritage. Culture and civilization are two inseparable aspects of the lifestyle of a community, country, or nation. A man may be considered cultured if he dresses nicely and then presents himself before others, but this does not necessarily make him a civilized person. Civilization refers to the way a nation thinks and feels, to its development of ideals such as non-killing, compassion, sincerity, and faithfulness. Culture is an external way of life. Culture is a flower, while civilization is like the fragrance of the flower. A man may be poor and yet be a civilized person. A cultured man without civilization, who may be successful in the external world, is not helpful for society, because he lacks the inner qualities and virtues which enrich the growth of the individual and the nation. Culture is external. Civilization is internal. In the modern world, the integration of these two is necessary. Indian civilization is very rich, but its culture has become a pseudo-English culture, which still creates problems in India today. Maharshi Raman. Dr. T. N. Datta, a prominent physician from Gajipur, UP, wrote to me that he was coming to see me at Nasik, where I was living. After visiting, he told me his reason for coming. He said he was very anxious to take me with him to Arunachala in South India to have a darshan of Maharshi Raman. In the winter of 1949, we left for Arunachala. My stay at this ashram was brief, but very pleasant. During those days, Maharshi Raman was observing silence. There were several foreign students staying in the ashram. Shastriji, one of his prominent disciples, would give discourses, and Maharshi Raman would sit quietly. There was one thing that I found in his presence which was very rare, and which I seldom found elsewhere. For those whose hearts were open to that voice of silence which was perennially radiating in the ashram, just sitting near him was enough to answer any question arising from within. It is true that to be in the presence of a great man is the same as experiencing Savikalpa Samadhi, Samadhi with form. Maharshi Raman did not have a physical guru. He is the greatest and holiest man born on the soil of India within 100 years period, said Dr. Radhakrishnan. A glance of such a great man purifies the way of the soul. According to Maharshi Raman, contemplating on the single query, "Who am I?" can lead the aspirant to the state of self-realization. Though this method of contemplation is the foundation stone of the philosophies of both the East and the West, it was revived again by Maharshi Raman. The entire Vedanta philosophy was brought into practice by the Maharshi. He put the Iliad in a nutshell. By knowing one's self, one knows the self of all. The very simple, profound method of self-inquiry is accepted by both Easterners and Westerners. After 5 days' stay in the spiritually vibrant atmosphere of Arunchala, we came back to Nasik. After visiting this great sage, I decided to resign the dignity and prestige of Shankaracharya. For a renunciate like myself, leading such a busy life had become burdensome and boring. My visit to Arunchala and the darshan of the Maharshi only added fuel to that fire which was already burning within me. Renounce thee, and you will attain. This echoed in my heart so powerfully that my stay at Nasik became more and more impossible. It was not easy for me to run away, abruptly leaving all my responsibilities. But one day the courage came to me, and I left Nasik for my Himalayan home. I have a firm conviction that no one can be enlightened by anyone else. But sages inspire and give inner strength, without which self-enlightenment is impossible. In today's world, human beings do not have any example to follow. There is no one to inspire them, and that is why enlightenment seems to be so difficult. Great sages are the source of inspiration and enlightenment. Meeting with Sri Aurobindo. It was unbearable for me to stay in the demanding environment of Nasik, and I thought of visiting Pondicherry and meeting the mother and Sri Aurobindo. The students of his ashram were very devoted and firm in their conviction that the way of life they led was supreme. The day I arrived at Pondicherry, there was a concert given by a famous musician who was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo. The mother was kind enough to arrange for me to stay in one of the quarters and to hear the devotional songs sung by that great devotee. My stay at Pondicherry for 21 days gave me enough time to strengthen the aspirations which I had received at the ashram of Maharshi Raman in Arunchala. During those days of my inner turmoil, I was very restless. On one side I was being pulled by renunciation, and on the other by the call of duty which had been assigned to me. While at Pondicherry I met Sri Aurobindo several times, and he was kind enough to talk to me. His personality was very overpowering and inspiring. I started respecting his modern and intellectual approach of integral yoga. I want to give you the gist of what I understood this philosophy to be. Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is described as integral non-dualism. This is an approach which seeks to understand reality in its fundamental oneness. The differences which we observe are looked upon as developments taking place within the framework of the all-inclusive unity of the Absolute. Integral non-dualism erases the distinctions of ethics, religion, logic, and metaphysics. Sri Aurobindo's conviction is that absolute reality in its essence is non-dual, non-conceptual, and logically indefinable. It is only accessible to direct experience through the penetrative insight of pure spiritual intuition. According to non-dualism, or Advaita, reality is beyond materialism, causation, structure, and number. This same conviction is expressed in the philosophy of Nirguna Brahman in Vedanta, in the concept of Shunyata in Buddhist philosophy, in the concept of Tao in Chinese philosophy, and in the philosophy of Tattva-tita in Tantra. The philosophy of Tantra consistently maintains that one can advance spiritually by awakening the latent, primal force called the Kundalini. When this spiritual potential is systematically channeled along the higher levels, living becomes effortless, spontaneous, and attuned to the ultimate goal of existence. Vaishnavism recommends the method of love and devotion through wholehearted self-surrender to God. Christian mysticism and Sufism have a close resemblance to Vaishnavism in this respect. "Let thy will, not mine, be done," is their secret of spiritual growth. Vedanta, by contrast, lays stress upon the method of contemplation and self-inquiry. It includes discrimination between the self and the not-self, and then the renunciation of emotional attachments to the not-self. As soon as false identifications with the not-self are removed, the indwelling light of truth is revealed. According to Aurobindo's integral philosophy, both the lower nature and the higher nature of man and the universe spring from the same ultimate reality. The lower nature is the physical force in the world and the source of instinctual drives in the unconscious mind. Man's higher nature is composed of pure consciousness and spiritual aspirations. It evolves out of the matrix of the lower nature through the awareness of the ultimate creative force called Shakti. Aurobindo calls this force Divine Mother. Man has to be faithfully aware of this force in order to attain the realization of the Absolute. This awareness implies a tranquil integration of the material and the spiritual. According to Aurobindo, the supra-physical can only be really mastered in its fullness when we keep our feet firmly on the physical. This awareness is developed through two methods. The first is the integration of meditation with action. Through meditation, one tears the veil of ignorance. He thus realizes his true self, which is the very self of all. Through selfless and loving actions, one relates creatively with the others. The second method of awareness of the divine lies in the knowledge of the ascending and descending forces of consciousness. These powerful movements gradually expand the spiritual outlook and help one to rise to higher levels of consciousness. The descending movement brings down the light and power of higher consciousness into all strata of our material existence. This consists of transforming the physical into effective channels of expression for universal love and all-unifying truth. Integral non-dualism sees evolution as the progressive self-manifestation of the universal spirit in material conditions. The whole universe is an expression or play of the divine. Man's highest destiny is to be fully aware of the universal spirit and thus advance the cause of evolution. Therefore, the essence of integral yoga lies in the active and effective awareness of the individual with the superconscious divine. Sri Aurobindo synthesizes the ancient philosophy of Advaita in the belief that it is not necessary for modern man to realize the goal of non-dualistic asceticism through renunciation. Meditation in action with non-attachment also prepares the sadhaka for awakening the primal force Kundalini. By the realization of the union of Shakti and Shiva, humanity can be elevated to a higher awareness. I was fully convinced that Sri Aurobindo's philosophy would have wide recognition by the modern minds of India, and especially of the West. But I was accustomed to quiet and solitude, and could not adjust to the numerous activities of the ashram, like dramas, concerts, and tennis. I returned to Nasik and determined to leave for the Himalayas. The Wave of Bliss. I once visited Chitrakoot, one of the holy places where, according to the epic Ramayana, Lord Rama lived during his exile. This place is situated on the Vindhya range, one of the longest mountain ranges in India. According to ancient tradition, Vairagi sadhus visited Vrindavan and Chitrakoot. Vrindavan for those who love Krishna, and Chitrakoot for those who love Rama. In another part of the Vindhya range, in a holy place called Vindhyachal, there lived many Shakti worshippers. Traveling toward the forests of Rewa state, I went to the Santana forest, and there met a Swami who was very handsome and highly educated in the Vedantic and Yogic tradition. He knew the scriptures and was a very brilliant sadhaka, meaning spiritual practitioner. He was later nominated as Shankaracharya of Jyotirmaya Pitham, which is in the Himalayas on the way to Badrinath. His name was Brahmananda Saraswati. He used to live only on germinated gram seeds mixed with a little bit of salt. He lived on a hillock in a small natural cave near a mountain pool. I was led by the villagers to that place, but I did not find anyone there and became disappointed. The next day I went again and found a few footprints on the edge of the pool made by his wooden sandals. I tried, but could not track the footprints. Finally, on the 5th day of my effort, early in the morning before sunrise, I went back to the pool and found him taking a bath. I greeted him saying, "Namo Narayan," which is a commonly used salutation among Swamis, meaning, "I bow to the divinity in you." He was observing silence, so he motioned for me to follow him to his small cave, and I did so gladly. This was the 8th day of his silence, and after staying the night with him he broke his silence, and I gently spoke to him about the purpose of my visit. I wanted to know how he was living and the ways and methods of his spiritual practices. During our conversation he started talking to me about Sri Vidya, the highest of paths, followed only by accomplished Sanskrit scholars of India. It is a path which joins Raja Yoga, Kundalini Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Advaita Vedanta. There are 2 books recommended by the teachers of this path: The Wave of Bliss and The Wave of Beauty. The compilation of the 2 books is called Saundarya Lahiri in Sanskrit. There is another part of this literature called Prayoga Shastra, which is in manuscript form and found only in the Mysore and Baroda libraries. No scholar can understand these spiritual yoga poems without the help of a competent teacher who himself practices these teachings. Later on, I found that Sri Vidya and Madhu Vidya are spiritual practices known to a very few, only 10 to 12 people in all of India. I became interested in knowing this science, and whatever little I have today is because of it. In this science, the body is seen as a temple and the inner dweller, Atman, as God. A human being is like a miniature universe, and by understanding this, one can understand the whole of the universe and ultimately realize the Absolute One. Finally, after studying many scriptures and learning various paths, my master helped me in choosing to practice the way of Sri Vidya. In this path, the Kundalini fire is seen as the Mother Divine, and through yoga practices it is awakened from its primal state and raised to the highest of the chakras. The chakras are wheels of life which form our spiritual body and connect the entire flow of consciousness. The science of chakra is very terse, but if one knows this science well, it serves him on all levels. The chakras operate on the physical, physiological, energetic, mental, and spiritual levels. These energy centers correspond in the physical body to points along the spinal cord. The lowest is located at the coccyx, the second in the sacral area, the third at the navel, the fourth at the heart, the fifth at the base of the throat, the sixth at the point between the eyebrows, and the seventh at the crown of the head. The lowest chakras are the grooves towards which the lower mind rushes. The heart, or Anahata chakra, separates the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere, and is accepted as the center of divine tranquility. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Judaism also recognize the center. That which is called Anahata chakra in Hinduism is called the Star of David in Judaism, and the Sacred Heart in Christianity. The higher chakras are the centers of upward traveling energy. There are many levels of consciousness from the heart chakra to the 1,000-petaled lotus inside the crown of the head. When one sits erectly for meditation, these centers are aligned. Energy can be focused on one chakra or another. Developing the capacity to direct the flow of energy to the higher chakras is one aspect of spiritual development. Knowledge of pranic vehicles is important if one wants to experience all the chakras systematically. There is a bulk of literature on the chakras in Hinduism and Buddhism, which was later explained and introduced by theosophical writers for Western readers. Western writers have also written many books on the subject of chakras, although most of them, with the exception of those written by Sir John Woodroffe, are misleading, for they consist merely of second-hand information without anything to guide one's practice. Such misleading literature on such a highly perfected science is found all over, even in health food stores. How ridiculous! Swami Brahmananda was one of the rare siddhas, meaning accomplished ones, who had the knowledge of Sri Vidya. His authoritative knowledge of the Upanishads, and especially of Shankara's commentaries, was superb. He was also a very good speaker. Swami Karpatri, a renowned scholar, was the disciple who requested him to accept the prestige and dignity of Shankaracharya in the north, a seat which has been vacant for 300 years. Whenever he traveled from one city to another, people flocked in the thousands to hear him. and after his nomination as Shankaracharya, his followers increased. One thing very attractive about his way of teaching was his combination of the Bhakti and Advaita systems. During my brief stay with him, he also talked about Madhusudana's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. Swami Brahmananda had a Sri Yantra made out of rubies, and as he showed it to me, he explained the way he worshipped it. It is interesting to note how the great sages direct all their spiritual, mental, and physical resources toward their ultimate goal. Among all the Swamis of India, I met only a few who radiated such brilliance and yet lived in the public, remaining unaffected by worldly temptations and distractions. I stayed with him for only a week, and then left for Uttarkashi. 3 Schools of Tantra. I was asked by my master to go learn from a great tantric teacher who lived in the Malabar hills of South India. The teacher was 102 years old. He was calm, learned, and healthy. Though he lived a householder's life, he taught many advanced yogis and swamis the philosophy of Tantra. There is a vast amount of literature on the philosophy and science of Tantra, but it is not easily understood and is often misused. This highly advanced esoteric science has been practiced by Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists. The Kadubhaksha Library of Patna, the Baroda Library, and the Madras Library are filled with manuscripts on the subject, but this literature is beyond the understanding of laymen. Also, competent teachers of Tantra are rarely available. However, properly practiced under a competent teacher, this path is the equal of any other spiritual path in self-enlightenment. According to the science of Tantra, male and female are 2 principles of the universe called Shiva and Shakti. These 2 principles exist within each individual. There are 3 main schools of Tantra: Kaula, Mishra, and Samaya. The Kaulas, or left-hand Tantris, worship Shakti, and their way of worship involves external rituals, including sexual practices. They meditate on the latent power within, that's Kundalini, and awaken it at the Muladhara chakra, which is situated at the base of the spinal column. Laymen often misuse this path. In the Mishra, mixed or combined school, inner worship is combined with external practices. The latent force is awakened and led to the Anahata chakra, or heart center, where it is worshipped. The purest and highest path of Tantra is called Samaya, or the right-hand path. It is purely yoga. It has nothing to do with any ritual or any form of worship involving sex. Meditation is the key, but this sort of meditation is quite uncommon. In this school, meditation is done on the 1,000-petaled lotus, the highest of all. This method of worship is called Antaryaga. The knowledge of Sri Chakra is revealed in this school. Knowledge of the chakras, nadis, meaning subtle nerve currents, and pranas, meaning vital forces, and a philosophical knowledge of life are required in order to be accepted as a disciple in this school. I was acquainted with all 3 schools, but was initiated in the path of Samaya. My favorite books explaining this science are The Wave of Bliss, that's Ananda Lahiri, and The Wave of Beauty, Soundarya Lahiri. I stayed with this teacher for 1 month, learning the practical aspects of this science and studying various commentaries on these two scriptures. Then I returned to the mountains. The Seven Systems of Eastern Philosophy. I often visited Dr. Ranande of Allahabad University, one of the finest exponents of Vedanta philosophy of his time. This matchless teacher and great mystic was popularly known as Guru Deva among his disciples. He took me to his Nembal ashram later on. Among all the university scholars of India, I have the most respect for this great man. Whatever I have systematically learned about Indian philosophy was because of him. He taught me that Indian philosophy is divided into 7 systems, which attempt to answer the most basic philosophical inquiries. These important questions are: Number 1. Who am I? From where have I come, and why have I come? What is my relationship with the manifold universe and other human beings? The second, what is the essential nature of my being? And what is the essential nature of the manifested world and its cause? The third, what is the relationship of the center of consciousness and the objects of the world? The fourth, what is the nature of the forms and names of the objects of the world? And how do they serve the essential nature of man or universal consciousness? The fifth, what are the guidelines for action as long as we live in the natural body? Do we live after death? The sixth, what is truth, and how do we arrive at rational conclusions on questions of truth? The 7 systems of Indian philosophy which address themselves to these issues are Vedanta, Yoga, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Nyaya, and Buddhism. The dates given for the teachers of the systems below have been determined by Western scholars. Scholars within these systems regard them as many millennia older. Vedanta. I am self-existent consciousness and bliss. These are not my attributes, but my very being. I do not come from anywhere or go anywhere, but rather I assume many forms having many names. My essential nature is free from all qualifications and limitations. I am like an ocean, and all creatures are like the waves. The individual soul is essentially Brahman, all-inclusive, all-expansive. The genderless Aum is its name. It is the nucleus, and the universe is its expansion. It is the absolute, transcendent, attributeless reality, and it also eternally embodies the capacity to bring to measure within itself its own inner Shakti. So the power of Brahman, called Maya, emanates and gives the appearance of becoming manifold. But in truth there is no manifoldness, and the infinite never becomes finite. There is a superimposition of the finite on the infinite, which is eradicated by unveiling reality again. Then one realizes himself to be in Brahman, as Brahman. He identifies himself with Brahman and becomes one with it. Below are some of the most important statements of the Vedanta philosophy, as found in the Upanishads. The first: there is nothing manifold here. From death to death he wanders, who sees anything here as though it were manifold. The second: he who is tranquil dwells in Brahman, from whom the universe emanates and into whom it dissolves. The third: all this is Brahman. The fourth: Brahman is pure gnosis. The fifth: this self is Brahman. Sixth: that thou art. 7. I am that. 8. I am Brahman. The philosophy which was taught by the seers of the Vedas from 2000 to 500 BC was passed down through a long line of sages such as Vyasa, Gaudapada, and Govindapada, the author of many ancient scriptures, who codified these ancient philosophies. Shankaracharya finally systematized the monastic schools in the 8th century AD, and many acharyas after him established various schools of non-dualistic and dualistic philosophies, which differed from him. Yoga. In the yoga system of philosophy, the individual soul is a seeker, and cosmic consciousness is the ultimate reality it finds within. Yoga accommodates all religions and all systems of philosophy as far as the practical aspects are concerned. While dwelling in the manifold phenomenon of the universe, the soul must take care of the material body, purifying and strengthening its capacity. In this system, the individual must practice the highest principle of behavior and control of the various modifications of mind through the commitments called yama and niyama. By practicing stillness in posture and breath, one then transforms oneself by having control over the senses with concentration and meditation, and finally attains samadhi. The final goal of this system is to attain kaivalya, meaning aloneness. This yoga system was also known several millennia before Patanjali, who codified it in the 1st century AD by compiling 196 aphorisms called the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga and Sankhya systems of philosophy are alike. Sankhya. The Sankhya system is dualistic and believes the conscious Purusha and the unconscious Prakriti to be separate, coexistent, and interdependent realities. In Sankhya, the conscious principle is again twofold. It consists of the individual soul, Jiva, and the universal soul or God, Ishvara. In other systems of Sankhya philosophy, the existence of God is irrelevant. All the schools of the Sankhya system believe in removing the pains and miseries which arise from Purusha's involvement with Prakriti, forgetting its ever pure, ever wise, and ever free nature. Like a rope with 3 strands, Prakriti has 3 attributes called Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, meaning tranquility, activity, and sloth. All phenomena of the universe, including mental operations, are nothing but interactions among these 3 gunas, or qualities of Prakriti. These bring to manifestation various aspects which remain in unmanifested form in the cause. When the 3 gunas are in balance, Prakriti is in a state of equilibrium. The mental and physical universe is created and passes through 24, 36, or 60 states that include all phenomena and experiences. All the schools of Indian philosophy have included something from Sankhya philosophy in their systems. This system is the very basis of Indian psychology. It gave birth to the positive science of mathematics, and then to the medical system of India, for to understand the body is to understand all human nature. The founder of the Sankhya school was a Suri, and Kapila, one of the most ancient seers, is called the Acharya of this science. Then followed Ishwara Krishna, who systematized the philosophy into the Sankhya Karika around the 3rd century AD. Vaisheshika. This philosophy deals with the physics and chemistry of the body and the universe, discussing the particular elements, their atoms, and their mutual interactions. Kannada, perhaps 300 BC, states the subject of his philosophy to be dharma, the code of conduct which leads human beings to prosperity in this life and the highest good in the next. This philosophy discusses 9 subjects: earth, water, fire, air, space, time, dimension, mind, and soul, and their mutual relationships. This philosophy was developed by Prashatpada in the 4th century. Mimamsa. The Mimamsa system was founded by Jaimini. In this system, the Vedas are accepted as self-evident scriptures, revealing internal knowledge. This system believes in salvation through action. It established a detailed philosophy of the efficacy of ritual, worship, and ethical conduct, which developed into the philosophy of karma. This school challenges the predominance of grammarians and logicians who maintain linguistics and rhetorics. It is a school of philosophy in action. Jaimini's date was perhaps 400 BC. Nyaya. Nyaya is the school of logicians founded by Gautama, one of the ancient sages. It regards doubt as a prerequisite for philosophical inquiry and elaborate rules for debate. All the schools of Indian philosophy to this day follow the Nyaya system of logic, which was further developed in the 16th century, and which is now called neo-logic, a complex system similar to the mathematical logic of the West today. Buddhism. Gautama the Buddha was born 2,600 years ago in Kaipalavastu, at the site of the ancient ashram of the sage Kapila, who was one of the founders of the Sankhya philosophy. Gautama studied this philosophy in depth under a teacher named Adara Kalama, and he later discovered the 4 noble truths. The first, there exists sorrow. The second, there is a cause of sorrow. The third, the sorrow can be eradicated. And the fourth, there are means for the eradication of sorrow. These 4 noble truths are already found in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, but the difference lies in the Buddha's doctrine of anatta, or non-self. The word neti, meaning not this, was fully understood by the ancient rishis, meaning Vedic seers. The Buddha refused to participate in metaphysical speculation. He would not discuss the existence of God, and he would not answer the question of whether the Buddhas exist after nirvana. He said that such questions were not worthy of consideration. The enlightened one, a highly practical teacher, wanted his disciples to practice the eightfold right path of action that would lead them to Bodhi, the finest level of consciousness. He accepted Pali as a language for communication. After Buddha's paranirvana, various groups of monks started following their own way. There then formed two major schools: Theravada, the doctrine of the elders, and Mahayana, the formal philosophical school of Buddhism, which disappeared in India. Great volumes have been written on the major historical and doctrinal differences between the two paths. Theravadins considered the teachings of Buddha to be completely separate from the rest of the Indian philosophical developments. They retained Pali as their medium to study the scriptures, although not a great deal of philosophical speculation developed in Pali. The Buddha remains their enlightened teacher, and great temples having beautiful statues were built to honor him, where ancient Hindu-style puja, meaning worship, is still offered. This doctrine does not accept Buddha as savior, however. Each person finds his own light, is then enlightened, and finally reaches anatta, or non-self. The Mahayana debated with other schools of Indian philosophy, and was forced to adopt the sophistication of the Sanskrit language. One of the greatest scholars, Nagarjuna, described Shunya and calls it the void, the storehouse of consciousness, Alaya Vijnana, of the Vijnanavadin school, is cosmic consciousness. Hindus had begun to accept the Buddha as the ninth incarnation of God, but the Buddhists were at a loss to fulfill the spiritual call and the human need for devotion to a higher being. So there developed the thought of a higher reality that incarnates. Here the Buddha has three bodies, or levels of existence. The first is Dharmakaya, the absolute being, like Shukla Brahman of the Upanishads. The second is Sambhoga-kaya, the universe as the emanation, like Shabala Brahman of the Upanishads, and Ishvara, or personal God. And the third is Nirmanakaya, the historical body of the Buddha, an avatar or incarnation. The Mahayana school still uses Kundalini and knowledge of chakra in their teachings. Visualizations of symbolic figures and elaborate ritualistic preparations are used exactly as Hindus do. Faith and the surrender to a higher compassionate being are practiced exactly as they were taught in Hindu scriptures. The Buddha's own path was Majjhima Patipada, the middle way. The Buddha's teachings were primarily for the monks, but like other ancient teachings, Buddhism became a way of life for a large section of people in the world. By following this middle path, one can eradicate avidya, meaning ignorance, which leads to tanha, meaning craving. Only then can one gain freedom from sorrow, pain, and misery. These seven systems deal with various aspects of reality and truth. They hold a higher transcendental goal as sacred, and agree on some basic essentials. For this reason, the syncretic literature of India, such as the Puranas and epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, regard all these systems as authentic. Soma. I read a book written by a mountain scholar who did research on Soma, the famous herb used by the Himalayan medicine men in their worship and rituals. A portion of the Vedas talks about this herb, how it is used, the way it is prepared, and where it grows. That book created a curiosity in my mind, and I contacted the writer. The writer introduced me to Vaidya Bhairav Dutt, a famous herbologist of the Himalayan mountains, who was considered to be the only living authority on Soma. He is no longer living, but his center and laboratory continue to supply herbs to various parts of the country. He was well versed in the scriptures too. This herbalist promised to bring the herb and also tell me how to use it. He said that it is a creeper which grows above 11,000 feet. There are only 2 or 3 places where it grows at that altitude. I gave him 1,000 rupees for his traveling expenses, and after the winter was over, he brought me somewhat less than a pound of that creeper. He then prepared the Soma, and we experimented with it on those sadhus who use marijuana and hashish. The use of this herb created a fearlessness in them. The descriptions of their experiences were somewhat similar to those Westerners who had ingested psychedelic mushrooms. The herbologist explained to me that there are several varieties of mushrooms which have similar effects. However, he said that the Soma creeper was definitely not from the mushroom family, but that it was from the succulent family. In an ancient Ayurvedic text, varieties of mushrooms are described with details of their color, size, and the way they are used. The text indicates that the ancients also used these for psychic experiences, although the books on cacti and succulents do not use the name Soma for this creeper. Other succulents do not produce the same effect. There are a few herbs, such as Agaricus, Hyoscyamus, and Stramonium, which are poisonous, but in small doses have hallucinogenic properties. It is important to know the proper quantity in using these herbs. The ancients wrote so much about Soma and mercury preparations that some scriptures describe hundreds of ways of preparing such intoxicants for human usage. Such external stimuli, however, are not permitted to be used in any of the schools of yoga. There are inferior sects of sadhus who use some of these herbs without knowing their proper usage. These sadhus are often found dumb, sitting here and there. The ancient medicine men knew how and when to use such herbs. Homeopaths recommend a single dose of arsenicum 10 mg to a dying patient for fearlessness, and hemlock poison was used by Egyptians and Greeks on the deathbed so that a dying person would feel no pain and could accept death pleasantly. Similarly, the use of Soma was especially recommended by the mountain herbalists of India to turn the mind inwards, and they included this herb in rituals which became part of the religious ceremonies of the ancient Aryans. Patanjali, the codifier of yoga science, says in the first sutra of the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutras that ausadi, medicine prepared from herbs, can help one in having psychic experiences. These psychic experiences have some validity and are higher than the experiences we receive through the senses, but they are definitely of no use as far as spirituality is concerned. The Soma rasa, meaning Soma juice, mentioned in the ancient literature, was used to help inferior students who were not capable of sitting in one position for a long time and who did not have the ability to concentrate their minds. This herb affects the locomotor system and makes one insensitive to external stimuli, so that thoughts start running in one direction. The body becomes still and free of pain. Some of those who did not practice steady posture through systemic discipline used Soma along with ritual worship before meditation. This was not as common as psychedelics are today. The use of this herb was restricted and controlled by a particular tradition of herbologists who spent their whole lives researching and experimenting on the use of various herbs. According to Vaidya Bhairav Dutt, administering these intoxicants with the use of mantra was a common practice. Mantras were used in solitude with fasting and other austerities under the guidance of an expert. A sect of sadhus was custodian of this knowledge. For those who have not practiced austerities and trained their minds, psychedelics are harmful. They might damage the nervous system and especially disturb the finer channels of energy, meaning nadis. The hallucinations occur, and one may become psychotic. I have examined the effects of drugs on people who have used them and have not found any spiritual symptoms in their behavior. They might have an unusual experience, but what good is that experience which has an adverse effect and a harmful reaction later on? A prolonged subtle depression is common of these drugs if the mind is not prepared and dietary habits are not carefully observed. A healthy diet, calm atmosphere, mantra, and guidance were important factors when Soma Rasa was used. I heard from this herbologist that he himself used what he called Soma Rasa. Actually, I had no way of verifying whether it was indeed the Soma used by the ancients or something else. He said that it had a very pleasant and elevating effect, but if he used it regularly, it brought on a depression as a reactionary effect. He also came to the conclusion that the repeated use of such herbs can also lead to a psychological addiction. But he persuaded me to try it once, saying, "It's wonderful. You've never had an experience like it before." One morning he prepared the juice of Ashta Varga, meaning a mixture of 8 herbs, and mixed some Soma creeper juice in it. We both drank this mixture. Its taste was a little bitter and sour. After a while he started chanting and swinging, and ultimately threw off all his clothes and started dancing. But I had a severe headache. I felt as though my head were going to blow up. I held my head in both my hands. The man who used to attend me could not understand why we were acting so peculiarly. He shook his head in puzzlement and said, "Lord, one is dancing outside, and the other is sitting in the corner of the room holding his head." I became so restless I felt like jumping into the Ganges, crossing it, and running away into the forest. It was a chaotic experience. As he danced, the herbologist began shouting that he was Shiva, the Lord of the universe, and cried, "Where is my Parvati?" who is Shiva's wife. "I want to make love to her." This disturbed all the students who came to visit me in the morning. They tried to restrain him, but he became so strong that 5 people could not hold him down. Though he was a slightly built man, he threw them off one after another. I saw what was happening from a window, but I did not come out of my room because of my heavy head. Another Swami bought 3 quarts of warm water and told me to do an upper wash. This yogic technique for cleansing the stomach involves drinking a large quantity of water and then vomiting it up. This relieved me a bit. This experience, which occurred during my stay at Ujjaila Ashram in Uttarkashi, disturbed the whole routine of the ashram, and I did not know how to explain it to my students. After a careful study of the use of psychedelic preparations over a number of years, I have concluded that the harm they can do far outweighs any positive benefits they might have. Those who are not psychologically prepared will have negative experiences, either when they ingest the intoxicant or later. Those who are prepared don't need such drugs.